Thanks for coming back from the floor. Starting the rest of our morning of work here with H264, and we have Representative Hengo here with us. If you'd like to join us in the chair to tell us about 264, an act relating to excluding disabled veterans' disability and pension income from household income.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Committee. Thank you for inviting me in today to present H264, excluding disabled veterans' disability and pension income from household income calculation for purposes of determining the homestead property tax credit. This concept was brought to the National Guard and Veterans Affairs Caucus several years ago as a priority of the Department of Defense. Annually, Wallet Hub, among other publications, use metrics to determine the best and worst states in the United States for military veterans to live. This year, Vermont ranks #1 on the list of worst states to live in. Overwhelmingly, Vermont is calculated to be one of the states with the highest cost of living for all households, but in particularly military households because of our high tax rates. One of the metrics used in the Wallet Hub calculator is this concept of exclusion of pension income and disability benefit from the calculation for property tax purposes. As you can see by doing a simple Google search of states that exclude or exempt disability payments, there is not one common theme, but each state seems to do something significant to honor disabled veterans. For those individuals and their families who became disabled as a result of their service and live with those disabilities on a daily basis, this bill seeks to provide them with greater relief than we currently give them. Current statute states that completely and permanently disabled veterans and their survivors can receive a property tax exemption on the first $10,000 appraised value of their homes. As you know from our work in the past few years, Vermont's property values have skyrocketed, and we feel that this is the time to adjust the statute to a more meaningful and reasonable standard. Thank you for your consideration of this important issue that affects many Vermonters. And I'll take your questions if you have any.
Yeah.
Thank you, Representative Hango. So this would just be for disabled veterans?
And their survivors and family members that are living in their primary dwelling in Vermont.
Thank you.
So if we did that, if we excluded this money from their income, that would mean their benefit would go up. They would get more money back to reduce their tax, to offset their tax.
I am not a tax expert, Representative, but I believe you're correct.
Correct.
That would be a good question for the tax commissioner.
Okay. The only problem I have with this is when that happens, when we reduce the amount for an individual or a group of individuals of a specific kind, and these would be disabled veterans, I mean, for whom I have the utmost respect, and I want to do all we can for them. That would mean that everybody else picks up the cost. So their taxes, which are already high, get higher.
Understood, but many Vermonters, and I really don't know the percentage, but I think it's somewhere well north of 50% of Vermonters get an income sensitivity credit. I don't know if that's the right word because I'm not a tax expert on their property taxes. So that would not affect, in my opinion, it would not regressively affect folks who are low income.
Okay.
I mean, it would, unfortunately, it would, because the adjustment is sort of on top of other things. And so even when people are sensitized, they still are impacted by any other changes in the education fund.
Okay. That's where my understanding of the tax system ends. So thank you for the correction. I appreciate that, Madam Chair.
Representative Hango, did your committee take any testimony and understand how many people this would affect?
Great question. I was only asked and saw the email at the end of the day yesterday to appear here, so I don't have the answer to that. My committee in the House has not taken any testimony. This is not from my committee.
Oh,
This
thank
is,
you.
my bill from the caucus, National Guard and Veterans Affairs Caucus, and I can find out the answer for that from the tax department, or that could be something you could ask of them or the Veterans Department, which would be Mr. Bob Burke.
And thank you, Representative Hango, for coming in on such short notice. We're about to get a large number of bills from other committees and wanted to do our very best to get in introductions for everything on the wall before that happened so that we didn't lose track of you and your bill.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, was that a question or a goodbye, Representative Maslin?
Just waving.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hango.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa.
And now we are going to learn about H67 with Mr. O'Grady.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for allowing me to participate remotely.
Absolutely.
I haven't been in your committee this biennium. I don't know how you like to best operate. Do you want me to put the bill on the screen?
We actually really like to see your face, and so
Okay.
we're going to follow along on our computers. So if you could
Okay.
mention page numbers somewhat regularly, that would be helpful.
Sure. Let me just get the bill up on my other screen.
I think we are all going to do that as well.
Okay. So my name's Mike O'Grady. I'm with the Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm going to talk to you today about H67, an act relating to household products containing hazardous substances. This bill, like two bills that have passed the House in the past, would establish an extended producer responsibility program for household products, hazardous household products, things like Drano, other toxic consumer products that generally are supposed to stay out of the landfill, out of your solid waste, and are supposed to be handled separately according to specific requirements of the Agency of Natural Resources hazardous waste rules. Now, extended producer responsibility is a policy approach that requires the producer or manufacturers of a product to take responsibility for the disposition or management of a product when it reaches its end of use. This usually involves both financial and operational responsibility. And it usually is something that is free to consumers, free to the public. The state currently requires extended producer responsibility for several different types of products, including paint, mercury lamps, mercury thermostats, e-waste, electronic waste, and primary batteries. This program is very similar to those other programs in that it requires manufacturers to join a stewardship organization that submits a collection plan to the Agency of Natural Resources that provides for the free collection from the public of covered household hazardous products, and then manages those products in the appropriate way, free of cost to the public and free of cost to the state. The financial responsibility to manage the program is on the manufacturers, and they are basically expected to manage that financial responsibility on their own. There is a fee provision in this bill. It is not a specific fee. It is a report requirement, report for A&R to submit to you a recommended fee next January. I know you all may not remember this because you haven't seen many agency fees in a while, Agency fees are supposed to pay for the cost of the program. The agency's cost in either implementing or overseeing the program. That is what this fee in section 3 of 867 would do. It would require ANR to report or recommend a fee that the stewardship organizations would pay that would fund ANR's cost in overseeing the EPR program for household hazardous products. So that's the general overview. Does anyone have any questions before I start going through the bill?
I think we're ready to just go through the bill. Thank you.
Okay. So the bill begins with the finding section that lays out why the bill is being introduced. It references the fact that there are thousands of products sold in the state that contain hazardous substances, that these products need to be managed separately from your typical solid waste and need to be disposed of outside of a landfill, that these leftover products are referred to as household hazardous waste, and the state solid waste management plan requires the solid waste management entities, which are referred to as the SWMEs. The SWMEs are required.
Michael, will you do me a
Yes?
huge favor and not call them that? Can you just, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's embedded in
can't.
my mind, so I might slip.
Okay, just if you could try, thank you.
So the solid waste management entities are required to hold a minimum of 2 household hazardous waste collection events every year, and some of them for more than 2 collection events, and some of them have permanent facilities. Those actions are expensive, and the solid waste management entities spend approximately $2.2 million a year to manage household hazardous waste. And those costs underneath our current solid waste system are subsequently passed on to Vermont residents through taxes, fees, and disposal charges. And there is a substantial failure of diversion of household hazardous waste. You know, consumers don't know that it doesn't go into the landfill, or are unaware that the product is hazardous, or sometimes it just winds up there. However, it winds up there, and consequently, 855 tons or more per year of household hazardous waste are being disposed of in landfills. There's general agreement among solid waste management entities and ANR that additional collection and education is required, but that is there's a funding constraint on that for new collection sites, and education and information. Household hazardous waste released into the environment can cause environmental issues, and therefore to improve diversion of household hazardous waste, reduce financial burdens on the solid waste management entities and the public, reduce the cost of the system overall, and lessen environmental and public health risk posed by improper disposal. The state should implement a program to require manufacturers of household products containing a hazardous substance to implement a stewardship program to collect those products free of charge to the public. So the definitions are the next section. They are very important in this bill. The most important one, or one of the most important ones, is on page 3, line 18, the definition of covered household hazardous product. It's a consumer product, and a consumer product is any product regularly used by a person, family, or household. So any product used by a person, family, or household that's offered for retail sale, and this is important, it's contained in the receptacle in which the product is offered for retail sale. So if somebody puts turpentine into a glass jar and then brings that for collection, that was not the container that it was sold in at retail sale. That is not covered by the program. And it is a covered household hazardous product if it meets one of the following 2 characteristics. It's a product or component of a product is a hazardous waste under Vermont's hazardous waste management regulations. So that's a pretty extensive definition. So instead of laying that out, there's just a cross-reference to the hazardous waste rule. The other way that a product is covered if it is a gas cylinder, and I'm gonna come to gas cylinder definition in a second. A covered household hazardous product does not mean a primary battery, a mercury lamp, a mercury thermostat, paint, a covered electronic device, a pharmaceutical drug, flea and tick collars, pesticides, cosmetics, or cosmetics. So those are all out either because there's already an EPR program for them or they're already being managed separately, such as pesticides, or there's specific federal provisions that prevent the state from regulating in an extensive way, such as with cosmetics. So those are all out. So what is a gas cylinder? So there's two ways that a gas cylinder can be covered by this program. First, if it is non-refillable, so not your propane tank, so a non-refillable canister with a water capacity of 50 pounds. So that's one way that a gas cylinder is in. And the second way is if it is a refillable cylinder, but it has a maximum capacity of 1 pound. So your grill propane tank is not part of this program because it's already subject to collection by the manufacturers and distributors of those types of propane tanks. But the little propane tanks that you might use for camping or other similar uses don't have that type of a program and do wind up in solid waste, and the solid waste management entities want them out of their waste stream because they pose a risk of both fire and of harm to staff. So those are part of the program, gas cylinders, but your propane tank is not. Also, medical grade cylinders are also out because they have basically a take back program. So the next important definition is a manufacturer. This is basically anyone who's responsible for bringing that product into the state in kind of a descending order. It's the person who actually manufactures the product under its own brand or label in the state. Or it's the person who sells in the state under its own brand or label. Or it owns a brand that it licenses or licensed to another person for use on a covered household hazardous product. Or it imports into the U.S. for sale in the state a product where the manufacturer does not have a U.S. presence. Or it's a person who manufactures a covered household product for sale without affixing a brand name. Or it's someone that assumes the responsibilities of all those other manufacturers that I just described. And that is honestly, and there's a de minimis exception if you are a person that manufactures a covered household hazardous product and then sells, licenses, or imports less than $5,000 worth in the US in a program year and is registered with the secretary, then you're not part of this program. An orphan covered product is when a covered household hazardous product for which no manufacturer is participating in the stewardship program is present in the take back. And that can happen. Say, some of these products sit on people's shelves for years until they're clean out their basement and take it back for collection. So a manufacturer might have gone out of business, might no longer be selling that product in the state, et cetera. That's an orphan product, and we'll talk about how those products are going to be handled in a minute. Then you get to the stewardship organization. The stewardship organization is an entity that basically assumes the responsibilities of multiple manufacturers underneath this program. And that's what the intent or the desire of the program is, to have a stewardship organization, hopefully only one to assume the responsibilities of all the manufacturers and implement the collection plan. So then you get to some of the operative components of the bill. The first is the sale ban. The hook for this bill, the hook for manufacturers to do this is that beginning on July 1, 2025, a manufacturer of a covered household hazardous product shall not sell that product unless all of the following have been that they are participating in a stewardship organization with an approved collection plan. They have identified all the manufacturers and the manufacturers' brands and products to A&R that are covered by the collection plan. They basically meet some eligibility requirements, which I'll talk about under 7185 a little bit later. And then they do the audit every 5 years. That is required a little bit later in the bill as well. And then beginning on July 1, 2024, that stewardship organization annually needs to register with A&R. They have to meet similar requirements. They have to have a list of manufacturers participating, a list of brands, list of products, contact information for ensuring manufacturer compliance, a description of how they don't ban other manufacturers from joining their organization, a name of a contact person for another manufacturer to identify if that other manufacturer wants to participate in their stewardship organization. And that's basically the sale ban and the stewardship organization registration requirements. So in order for a manufacturer to sell that covered household hazardous product on July 1, 2025, they need to be in a stewardship organization with an approved collection plan. And what does a collection plan need to do? And that's what 7183 provides. And there are minimum requirements under the collection plan. Again, it has to list all the manufacturers, brands, and products are covered. That's a duplicative requirement throughout the program, but it's so that retailers, consumers, the agency knows what is actually covered by the stewardship program. The collection plan needs to provide free statewide collection. So any person, which is referred to as a covered entity, is that any person can bring a covered household hazardous product to a collection site, including the orphan products. So orphan products can be brought to any collection site. They have to be accepted, as all covered household hazard products have to be accepted. The stewardship organization can't refuse collection of a product, including that orphaned product. They shall also pay for the collection, processing, and management of the covered household hazardous products. And covered collection costs include facility costs, equipment costs, labor, supplies, maintenance, etc. And where are those costs going to be incurred? And that you get to that on page 11, line 1, subdivision 3. The other component of the plan is that it has to provide for convenient location. In other EPR programs, the convenience is provided through usually allowing a retailer to opt into being a collection point. But these products are of such a nature and of such a potential harm to a person or the environment that this program doesn't allow a retailer to be a collection point. This program intends that the existing municipal infrastructure for collection will continue to be the collection infrastructure for covered household hazardous products. And that's because A, it already exists. B, they know what they're doing and they know how to manage this stuff in an appropriate way. And it allows for the manufacturers to basically plug into a system almost immediately, provided that they can reach agreement with the solid waste management entities for costs, because the solid waste management entities are going, because this program requires the stewardship organizations to assume the cost, the solid waste management entities are going to shift that 2.2 million, which I referred to in the findings, to the stewardship organization. And that is how municipal costs are alleviated, because the infrastructure is going to remain, but the costs are going to have to be paid by the stewardship organization. The collection plan also has to have a mandatory public education and outreach component.
Michael, can you pause for 1 second? Sorry.
Michael, I once upon a time was a treasurer of the Central Vermont Solid Waste District. And I'm just curious, there's nothing in here so far as you've gone to say that a solid waste management district could not morph into taking on the partnership role that you just articulated, or am I not reading this correctly? It could still shift the costs, but they could be the designated partnership for a certain geographic area, no?
So the stewardship organization is supposed to assume the responsibilities of the manufacturers.
Yep.
So it's usually made up of manufacturers.
Okay.
So theoretically, you're right. There's nothing in the bill that prohibits a solid waste management entity from somehow becoming, I'm going to call it the corporate entity that takes on the responsibilities of all the manufacturers.
Yeah.
But I don't know of that happening in this model. There are other models where the state is the entity that issues the plan and administers the plan and then contracts out collection and disposition and then bills the manufacturer. That's how, for example, Vermont does electronic waste. But there's reasons why Vermont did that for electronic waste, and it can be problematic. And it puts a lot of responsibility on the state. This basically assumes that the manufacturer is going to form their own organization as a separate corporate entity.
I got it. Thanks.
Okay. Moving down on page 12, line 9, the plan has to dictate how the manufacturer, the stewardship organization, is going to comply with all applicable rules. The secretary later on in the bill, you will see, has the ability to set special handling requirements for these products because of their nature. And the plan has to provide for how they will comply with those. The plan also has to demonstrate how it's going to dispose of these products. And generally, it should follow the state's priority order for waste management, source reduction, reuse, recycling, energy recovery, and disposal. And the product shall be recycled when technically and economically feasible. It also has to have a performance goal. Now, the performance goal here is a little bit different from other EPR programs. We're not going to weigh everything and say, this is how much you performed. This is about, the performance goal in this program is about how many people are using the system. And it's basically determined by how many people bring a product for collection in a year divided by the total number of households. So total number of households that use the system divided by the total number of households across the state. And it does include seasonal households. I know you guys have been talking about that a lot. It does include seasonal households because they can use the system. And then the participation rate in the first 5 years of the plan will be 5%. That's what the goal is, 5% of households using the system in the first year. After that, the secretary, the manufacturers will propose a new participation rate. Secretary shall approve it. The secretary shall use what's called the waste composition study, which is required already under statute, where the state actually goes and looks at our trash and determines what's in our trash. And so they will look and see what's in our trash. And if there's a certain amount of covered household hazardous products in it, they'll recommend a participation rate to hopefully reduce that.
Michael, do you mean like they're going to look in my personal trash, or do you mean they're going to look at like my entire waste district's trash a little bit to see how it's working out?
Well, technically they have the authority to look in your personal trash, and they have done that. Usually it's when enforcement, when they find stuff in the transfer station and they want to find out where it's coming from. But generally the composition study is they'll go to a transfer station, go to a landfill and do they'll take basically some of the tractor trailers that are coming in and take it off to the side and break it down and like literally go through and determine what's in those trailers.
Representative Sims.
Was there any discussion around the participation rates, or like, as I look at that now, it looks like it's just sort of a statewide goal. Is there any conversation about sort of equitable access and geographic participation goals?
No, there wasn't, but remember that collection needs to be convenient. And so that is something that A&R will look at when the plan comes in from the stewardship organization. And if there isn't convenience in certain parts of the state, then I think A&R has the ability to require additional collection events or opportunities for those areas.
Yeah, I mean, I also had sort of questions about trying to better understand what that convenient collection location sort of means. I live in an area of the state where often convenient is, an hour drive to something that's open a couple hours once a week. Was there a sense of, how this might lead to increased access to programs and sort of, what convenient location and hours and operations sort of mean?
I don't specifically recall a discussion about increasing the convenience requirements because the base assumption is that the existing infrastructure will serve the initial collection needs. But that is the convenience standard is usually a standard that's discussed in an EPR program, and it can get pretty specific. It can be like in a city with 5,000 or more people, you need 4 collection sites. In a city that's less than 5,000 people, you need to have a collection site within a 15-minute drive. Things like that.
The administration's going to come in on this to maybe dive in on things like that more. And then if that's still not satisfactory, we could bring in individual waste districts if we need to. Representative Meslin?
Yeah, thank you. Morning, Mike.
Morning.
The way it works now in Upper Valley Solid Waste Management District is they have household, junk stuff. Household hazardous cleanups or collections once, twice a year, twice, I guess they have to have. And in answer to a couple of the questions here, they always ask for which town we're from, because you can cross borders to take your stuff. So they always ask town of origin or the zip code so that they're tracking at least from which communities the household hazardous wastes are coming from. And I assume that the plan will discuss how stuff that's brought in the back of my pickup is disaggregated and goes to the right manufacturer, source, or whatever. But I guess I wait for DEC to come in to tell us how they're going to do that.
Well,
or maybe there's a better way.
I think you just need to go to the next subdivision of the plan.
Oh, look at that. Back to you. Thank you, Michael.
So the plan is supposed to describe how it will fund implementation, including how it's going to distribute the cost to the multiple manufacturers that are part of the organization. And so that will require some basic analysis of the products that are coming in and attribution of those products to manufacturers. It's probably going to be done on a sales data percentage. This manufacturer sells this percentage of this type of product, so they're going to get assessed this percentage of the cost. But they will be looking at the products that come in if only to identify orphan products and identify how much of the orphan share needs to be distributed across all manufacturers. So that is something that I do think will be part of this program, is basically source identification, meaning the manufacturer. And I do think there will be some source identification of like, where is this stuff coming from, as a total part of the program. Should I move on?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So the term of each plan is 5 years, and the agency can make it less in subsequent plans, but generally they're looking for a 5-year plan, and the stewardship organizations need to implement that collection plan on or before July 1, 2025. You're now on page 15, line 5, section 7184. A manufacturer meets the requirements of the chapter by participating in a stewardship organization that takes on the sale ban requirement, takes on the stewardship registration requirement, and takes on the collection plan requirement, takes on the reporting requirement, and takes on the audit requirement. There are some qualifications for a stewardship organization. They've got to assume the responsibilities of the manufacturer. They have to not create unreasonable barriers for participation. So if And this has come up in other EPR programs. Sometimes the manufacturers, they just don't like each other. They're like, I don't want to play with that guy in my stewardship organization. And that's fine. They can create their own stewardship organization, a separate one, so they don't have to play together. But they can't have barriers that would prohibit other manufacturers from joining their stewardship organization. So no barriers to allow other manufacturers to be part of your stewardship organization. And then they have to maintain a public website that lists all the manufacturers and brands and products so that consumers, solid waste management entities, just the general public know what's covered by this program. And then you get to the report. Annually, the stewardship organization has to report to A&R. It has to describe its collection program. It has to report the volume or weight by hazard category of the covered household hazardous products collected, the disposition of the products, the number of covered entities participating, the number of households participating. And again, Jim, and each collection facility or collection event from which the covered household hazardous product were collected. So you get that source identification. They have to have the name and address of all facilities where products are collected and delivered, the weight of the covered household hazardous products sold in the state. So that gets you some sales data information. The sales data information is going to be confidential. It's generally considered to be trade secret or confidential business information. So it's not going to be something that can be obtained through a Public Records Act request. They'll compare the plan's participation rate and public awareness with actual participation rate and how it can be improved, describe the methods it uses to reduce, reuse, collect, transport, recycle, and process the products. It will describe the cost of the plan, including the costs of administration, collection, transportation, recycling, disposal, and education. I want to stop there. The cost of the plan are going to be assumed by the stewardship organization and the manufacturers. The costs should not be passed on directly to the consumer, to a solid waste management entity, or to the state. The cost may wind up being dispersed through increases to the cost of the products, but it cannot be dispersed to the public through direct assessment of costs. And then the report has to describe the evaluation and success of its education materials. And if multiple stewardship organizations are implementing the collection plan, the stewardship organizations shall include a summary of their coordinated education. And then they should also recommend change. And then there's an audit that begins 5 years after the plan starts.
Michael?
Looking, yep.
Can you just remind us what page number you're on? I think some folks are losing track.
Sorry. Page 17, line 11.
Thank you.
There's an audit that's done, and it's really not, the typical use of the word audit. It's an operational audit. The stewardship organization hires an independent third party to look at the plan and the plan's operation, to examine the effectiveness of the program. It will look at its cost effectiveness. The cost effectiveness, its financing, et cetera, is not the only thing that the audit will look at. And then the auditor makes recommendations to A&R on ways to increase the program's efficacy. Any report or audit is posted to the website of the stewardship organization for public review. Then you get to page 18, line 3. This is an antitrust provision. Antitrust law prohibits manufacturers from working together or colluding on price or products, or where products will be sold, or how products will be distributed in a state. And so manufacturers get a little bit nervous about stewardship organization requirements because it looks like they're colluding. They are working together. Or it looks like they could somehow violate antitrust requirements. So what this provision does in subsection A says, when they're working together to implement this stewardship program for household hazardous products, that they will individually or jointly be immune from liability from state antitrust laws. But subsection B says, but that immunity from liability does not apply to any agreement among the producers, manufacturers, stewardship organizations affecting the price of covered household hazardous products, or any agreement restricting the geographic area in which the product is sold. So they can work together to do the stewardship organization. They can't work together to collude and change prices and or agree or manipulate where products are sold. In addition, the state can't immunize the manufacturers from federal antitrust law. Manufacturers ask us to do that, but the state can't do that. So federal antitrust law remains. Then you get the agency's responsibilities. That begins really on page 19, line 1. They review and approve the collection plans. There's criteria for plan approval. It has to comply with all the requirements of the collection plan under 7183B, has to provide adequate notice to the public of collection opportunities. They have to ensure that collection of covered household hazardous products occurs in an environmentally sound way. They have to promote the collection and disposal of covered household hazardous products, and the plan must be reasonably expected to meet performance goals and convenience standards. If the stewardship organization manufacturers fail to submit a plan that is acceptable to the secretary or does not meet the requirements of the chapter, the secretary shall modify the plan to make it conform to the requirements. So the secretary basically can say to the stewardship organization, this plan is not good enough. You need to do this, and this is what you will do. There's provisions about how the amendment to a plan can be done at the secretary's discretion or at the request of a stewardship organization. And then the secretary has to amend the performance goals and the collection plans at least every 5 years. Previously, you saw that performance goal will be based on the waste composition study. The secretary reviews the registrations of stewardship organizations. Now you're on page 20, line 14. Secretary acts in supervisory capacity over the stewardship organization to make sure that they're actually doing what is required under the chapter. And then page 20, line 19, the secretary adopts special handling provisions for these products because of their nature. And then page 21, that really should not be there. Subsection G should be gone. And that is because at the very last minute, pesticides were removed from the scope of the program. Subsection page 21, line 1 through 5 should be deleted. That's my fault. Page 21, line 6, there's a body of constitutional law regarding solid waste. It's called flow control. And under flow control law, municipalities that own their own landfills or own their own waste disposition facilities may dictate that waste generated in their municipality go to that facility. And that kind of undermines EPR programs because you want the stewardship organization to establish a statewide program and to manage these products in the most effective way. And if you had a municipality that said, no, you have to send all, say it was Burlington, you have to send all your covered household hazardous product to Burlington so Burlington can get whatever financial benefit out of that. Well, that undermines this program. So 7188 basically states that a municipality can't use its flow control authority to dictate that the product go to their specific facility. There aren't that many, to my knowledge, there aren't any municipalities in the state that have a household hazardous waste disposition facility, but this is kind of necessary to make sure that that doesn't happen. 7189 is rulemaking. A&R may adopt rules to implement the requirements of the chapter. And then section 3 is the fee provision. On or before January 15th, you're on page 22, line 1. On or before January 15, 2024, A&R submits to you a recommended fee for the registration of stewardship organizations under the Covered Household Hazardous Product Program. Remember, that is the fee to pay for the cost of the agency in administering and overseeing the program.
So, Michael, I just want to clarify that I am understanding this. So that proposed fee will cover basically the agency's responsibilities in the section that you just went through.
Correct.
But all of the work of moving the hazardous waste around is going to be covered within the new organization and by the producers themselves. And we're not involving ourselves. Okay, thank you.
The only way that we involve ourselves is that the agency, the stewardship organization reports to the agency the cost of the program, and the agency reviews that. And then there's the audit every 5 years to look at the cost effectiveness of the program. So that's how the state is involved in the costs of the program. Should I move on?
I think so. Thank you.
Page 22, line 10, section 4. This is the section of statute that bans certain categories of waste from the landfill disposal. And so this is adding covered household hazardous products beginning July 1, 2025. Section 5 and 6 and 7 relate to A&R's general kind of default chapters. A&R has a general default chapter for public notice. It has a general default chapter for enforcement and has a general default chapter for appeals. Section 5 is a general default chapter for public notice. It provides that the public notice that A&R will follow for these collection plans is called type 3 notice, where notice is provided through the administrative bulletin. And you will see on page 23, line 21, covered household hazardous waste collection plan is listed as being a type 3 procedure.
Michael, I know there's a sort of trend, I guess that's not actually the word I want to use, but it's the word I'm using, in state government to ensure that notices are provided in multiple languages. Does this default chapter include that notice?
I would need to go back and check on that, but the agency generally does a pretty good job of providing. I mean, if you go to the agency's website, you can reach resources in multiple languages that describe the various programs. But I will check. I don't know if the language of that chapter specifically references that. Earlier on in this bill, the collection plan and its public education and outreach is supposed to be provided in multiple languages for the diverse populations of the state. So that is embedded in the program.
Lovely. I'm sorry, I missed that piece further up. Thank you.
But I don't know if this public awareness chapter actually has that. I have to check.
Thanks.
Section 6 is A&R's default enforcement chapter. A&R will have all of its general enforcement authority that it does. And so that is adding that chapter for covered household hazardous products to A&R's general enforcement authority. Section 7, which is page 24, line 16. This is the general default chapter for how you appeal an act or decision of A&R in implementing any of its programs. And you will see on page 25, line 4 and 5, the covered household hazardous products is being added to the default appeal chapter. And then section 8 is the effective date.
Representative Bodie?
What was the vote coming out of committee on this bill?
It was unanimous.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mike, to go back to 7188 as related to that, I know currently solid waste districts can mandate, require regular mixed solid waste to go to a certain landfill because we, Upper Valley Solid Waste, gets a portion of the tipping fee to run the district. And I see what 7188 does is otherwise provided in the bill. Hazardous waste is treated differently. So it won't go to a landfill, for example. It'll be pulled out, and what this does, I think correctly, is says, okay, we can't use the household hazardous waste, bad stuff provision to interfere with sending the rest of the solid waste to a landfill, and it won't interfere with the tipping fee provision that helps run solid waste districts. And I don't see any conflict here. I just want to make sure that I'm reading it correctly and that I've got this right.
Right. I mean, this section is really kind of the reverse of what you just said. It's not about dictating where solid waste is going. It's dictating where the household hazardous product waste is going, and not allowing the municipalities to manipulate that. Their ability to dictate under their solid waste authority where municipal solid waste is going to be disposed of, they still retain that authority. They still will be able to collect that tipping fee, the solid waste franchise tax.
And, that's the way I read it. So I'm not seeing any conflict. So that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, Representative Brennan.
Michael, does this bill include agricultural products? I know there's a chemical of some kind they use to wash out the milk tank to get rid of the stuff they call the stone. And then there's another similar product used for evaporator pans out in the sugar house. Same thing, it gets rid of a substance they call niter. And I've always been told that stuff was like oven cleaner. So you got to use gloves, and it's pretty toxic.
It may include agricultural products. It's any product that meets for the characterization of the product that you just described, whether or not it's a hazardous waste underneath existing hazardous waste rules. And that really usually boils down to toxicity, ignitability, corrosivity, and there's one or two other characterizations of waste, but it may include ag products.
That would all be determined later?
No, they already know whether or not they meet that definition. Manufacturers of those products, of these products, are aware because there are things like requirements for transit internationally or interstate that they have to meet, something called the Federal Hazardous Materials Transportation Act. So they know whether or not their product meets this characterization or not.
Thank you.
And so we're not changing the categorization at all. We're creating sort of a system of improving the disposal of an existing covered category.
That is correct.
Thank you.
So I've got a question. Mike, on the findings on page 2.5. So the solid waste, I can't say swimmies, spend approximately 2.2 million per year. Did that figure change as different drafts of this bill came along?
It did. It was originally 1.6, but the committee conferred with the solid waste management entities who had a meeting earlier this week to confer about the bill and confer about costs. And their new estimate has increased from 1.6 to 2.2, as did the tonnage. The tonnage in the previous bill was 643 tons, I think. And they have determined that it's really about 855 tons that are being disposed of annually in landfills.
Sorry, can I just, right before you go, just want to make sure that folks know that after lunch, we are going to hear from both joint fiscal on this and from the Agency of Natural Resources on this. I was not saying that in order to dissuade your question. I just wanted to realize that maybe the committee didn't know. So I wanted to make sure they knew.
Right.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure whether this would wait for the agency or.
I feel like Michael often knows the answer to all the questions, and so feel free to go for it.
I'm looking at this a very specific way. So I have Bill's oven cleaner manufactured in California. So it's not a Vermont product. It's still in its container. I want to get rid of it. So I go to some location which is set up by the stewardship organization. The manufacturer, Bill, out there in California has joined this organization so that he can sell it in Vermont and pays some money to that organization. My container then goes to the stewardship organization. What do they do with it? What in the bill, I'm sure it's in there, guarantees that that can of Bill's oven cleaner ends up not in a California landfill or any other landfill, even ours, but it gets disposed of properly?
So there's a component of the collection plan that requires the disposition to comply with federal requirements and with any special handling requirements that are set by the secretary. And you can find that on page 12, lines 9 through 20, going on to page 13. First, you have the environmental standards, and then you have the method of disposition. And so they have to comply with federal law. There aren't that many places or that many businesses that manage these products. There's maybe 4 that are involved in like the collection and transport of these products. And a few, I don't know the specific number that and manage what in solid waste lingo is called end of life management. And so they have their end of life management facilities, and there aren't that many of them. So that's where the stewardship organization, that's who they'll use to transport it, collect and transport, and that's who they'll use for end of life management.
Okay, thanks.
Any other? No other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Michael, for taking us through
You're
this.
welcome.
Oh, I had a question. You kindly offered us up a timeline,
Yep.
which I realized after I was about to ask you a timeline question. So thank you for that. That's really helpful. So essentially, none of this really starts until the fee is recommended, is what I'm seeing here. Am I missing something?
You are not. That is
Okay.
correct. The fee has to come in, and because your specific committee and the General Assembly as a whole has to set fees. The fee has to be set first before a stewardship organization can register.
Okay. If for some reason we fail in our duties and don't pass a fee, what happens with the stewardship organization on July 1st?
Great question. Unlike some of the other EPR programs, there isn't a specific requirement that the registration be accompanied by a fee, because we don't know what it is yet. So it's not written in. So the registration is still required. The agency is still required to do the program, but they're going to have to absorb the cost somehow without a registration fee. So that failure to set a fee or failure to have a fee won't jeopardize implementation of the program, or should not.
Okay. It would just jeopardize sort of long-term funding for.
Right.
Okay.
A&R won't be happy.
And are there other things that are going to need to be approved by the General Assembly at that time? Or is that the only piece that's left for approval?
I think at that time, or maybe before that time, you'll probably get a request for an FTE or two.
Okay.
I didn't hear that because the door closed.
An FTE or two.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Thank you. And we can ask Mr. Chapman about that this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. And thank you again for allowing me to participate remotely.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to change that one paragraph that's not supposed to be there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I'll probably confer with the chair of Environment and Energy to see if she wants to do that as an amendment.
Okay. We're happy to do it too if needed. It doesn't.
Okay. All right. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye. We are now going to take a deep breath and then shift gears entirely to talk about our budget appropriations memo, which is posted under Andrew Stein's name from the Department of Taxes, who will join us in a second.
Madam Chair.
No, it's not.
Under Emily's
Emily.
name. But
Under Emily's name.
But
Great.
Andrew did send a
He did.
document
Thank
to
you.
refer to.
So we have a presentation from Andrew, and then we have a document under Emily's name. Is Emily also joining you?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I just did not switch it.
Okay, great. No, it's okay. So we are slightly changing every year, it seems the Appropriations Committee improves their process for how they get feedback from committees. For every other committee, I think in the building, this is a sort of lengthier activity than it is for us because we tend to not spend money out of the general fund in this committee for the most part. So they have a much lengthier process to go through to sort of prioritize things and, administrative asks and policy goals and all of those things. We sort of have a smaller project that we have to do, but we do still need to do it and get through it. And so we're going to be hearing about not sort of the full administration's ask, because most of those are tax policy. This is just the pieces where we're spending money. And we're going to be sort of working our way through the memo. There's actually there's a second document that needs to be posted. It can go under my name.
The chart.
The chart, yes. Thank you. So eventually we're going to be filling in this chart that will be uploaded in a second. As a way of sharing with the appropriations committee what we are interested in. Yes.
Will this information include how much we're spending on fees that we're not collecting on fees? The amount of money that gets taken out of the general fund?
Ooh, I don't think that's a line, but there's this whole section of it that you'll see that's feedback that our committee would like to give. And so we can certainly include that there.
Yeah, we should.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me too.
So we're looking at.
So we're going to hear a presentation from Mr. Stein, who is welcome to join us in the chair. And then this is going to be sort of our first conversation in our efforts to fill in this chart that will be up on our website in a second. And so this is our opportunity to think about what else we want to know in order to fill in that chart. That is due sometime in the next.
May 1st.
May 1st.
March.
No,
March.
no.
March 1st.
March 1st. Which we have a whole 2 weeks until, almost. So, does everyone feel oriented?
Yes.
Found the things inside the internet? Took the deep breath? Not thinking about hazardous waste anymore? Thinking about the tax department? Welcome, Mr. Stein, to our committee.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Sorcha, can we put up or would you all like to see the presentation? Do you have the budget presentation?
We have it on our screen.
If that's fine, I have it
Yes.
right here.
Great.
Walk you all through.
Thank you. But this is a great opportunity you just gave me to talk about something that has nothing to do with you. So I'm going to take it for a minute. Starting next week, we are going to try out the idea that when we have a witness here sitting in a chair, we're going to share presentations on the screen. But when we have a witness inside the screen, we'll look at our own devices so that we can see that person's face. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that way we can maybe have a shared experience a little bit more. Yeah. But today we're not going to do that because it's too much short notice. So, Mr. Stein, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Andrew Stein. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Department of Taxes. A brief introduction because I missed the introduction day here with our leadership team. I've been in this role for about 2 years now. Prior to this, I was the deputy at the state auditor's office. And prior to that, I was regularly in this committee as an economist for the department under the last administration and this administration, working on a range of policy initiatives. So it's a little bit of my background, and it's nice to be here with you all in person. The last time I was in this room, I think it was House Healthcare.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken.
So we got 12 members. We got moved up to the penthouse.
Oh, okay. So this is an upgrade.
You like to pretend, I think that, yeah.
It's a beautiful room. And it's nice to be here in person. So I'm going to start on page 4, and I'm going to 4 and 5 of the presentation. I know you've seen this before. Craig told me that he's walked you through our core values, our mission statement, and our strategic goals. You all have an understanding of our department that the appropriations committees don't necessarily have an understanding of. So I'll keep this very high level and just say that the exercise of refining our mission statement, of refining our strategic goals, hey, Emily, and of refining our core values, we found to be very, very fruitful. It's been really, really helpful, particularly the core values. When I shifted back to the tax department in this role, and Craig, Rebecca, and I were looking at how do we align our organization? How do we align the department better in pursuit of these goals in our mission statement? We identified that the department was lacking core values and common language to get us all on the same page. And working through this process of establishing these values and then integrating them into our various operations. Right now, we're working on a new merit policy that incorporates them. It's been really, really helpful for just getting us all on the same page. An example from today, we rolled out a new appointment tool for taxpayers today. And the message coming from our Assistant Director of Taxpayer Services, who shared this new initiative with his team, was we're putting service front and center here. We're giving taxpayers more options to make appointments with us, clarifying how to make appointments with us. And it's all in pursuit of providing better service to taxpayers. So that's just an example from today of how we use these core values. Anybody have any questions about this? I know you've heard about this, so I was going to jump into the budget a little sooner. Great. So page 6, which I realize isn't numbered. I'm going to start with this, give you all a brief overview of our budget. So the pie chart, this is high level, and we'll delve into the details. We're looking at total expenses this year of $30.8 million. The largest piece of this pie goes to salaries and benefits. Without the people at our department, we wouldn't be able to administer Vermont's tax code. Even with our very modern systems, it takes a lot of human power to program them, to test them, to make sure that they're working year after year with all of the changes that inevitably go into Vermont's tax code. We administer 30 plus tax types, as you know, and to keep a system like this functioning well requires a lot of human input. The IT piece of our budget this year is going up because we're proposing to incorporate the Computer Modernization Fund or the I believe it's called the Tax System Computer Modernization Fund for legal purposes. We just call it the Computer Modernization Fund at the department. We're proposing to incorporate that as part of the annual budget cycle, provide heightened transparency in that space. And I'll delve more into that proposal in the next couple of slides here. And then we round this out with postage and printing, which has become a decreasing component, has decreased as a slice of the pie here. For context, 20 years ago, about 90% of personal income tax returns were filed via paper. Today, well over 90% come in electronically, and that's our biggest tax type. So that's just a little bit of context there. We're approaching 90% of all returns being filed electronically. Year over year, we're seeing great reductions in paper, which there's a lot of benefits for the state on that front. There's far fewer errors. We can process the information much quicker. You can automate a lot of processes when you receive it digitally. Rent and building services, that speaks for itself. Internal services, that's everything from paying for finance and management's internal service fees to the state auditor. And then we have rent and building services and other as well, which that's just miscellaneous expenses. So current initiatives, I just want to provide a brief overview of this. Right now, we're still, throughout the course of this fiscal year, we've been implementing a range of new policies. The Acts 138 tax reforms, that's a big personal income tax package that this committee dealt with last year. New child tax credit, changes to the earned income tax credit, a range of other student loan interest deduction changes, et cetera. Corporate income tax reforms on the policy side, but also I want to highlight some operational reforms. We have, over the past 2 years, we've dedicated more resources to focusing on corporate income tax than ever before. It requires a certain type of professional that the department didn't have as many of in the past as we do now to understand this space. We've also invested a lot in education in this space. And we've also joined the Multi-State Tax Commission's Joint Audit Committee on Corporate Income Tax, which there's about 30 other states that are part of this Joint Audit Committee. And we leverage our resources. Our tax code is similar to numerous other states' tax codes. And so there will be auditors auditing some of the largest, most impactful corporate income tax returns in the country to kind of scale up those efforts, if you will. And so that's been a big initiative for us. It's a big initiative too in terms of equity with regard to compliance exercises. It's a lot easier to audit simpler returns than it is to audit more complex returns. And typically your most well-endowed taxpayers have the more complex returns. So this is a shift in taxpayer equity in terms of how we're treating taxpayers from a compliance perspective. Cannabis taxes, that was it's a big deal. New market, there's a lot of new businesses in that space. So there's a number of folks who have opened businesses who previously have never run a business before, and there's a lot to know in that space. So there's been a lot of support provided there. And new local option tax towns. There's been a little bit of confusion there, as you all know, and we're working to iron that out. So we want to maintain a historically high processing efficiency this tax season last year, and I can go through those metrics in a little bit. I think Craig has probably provided an overview of this, but we had the most efficient tax season we've ever had from a personal income tax perspective in terms of the percentage of refunds issued within 45 days, in terms of erroneous refunds prevented, and in terms of the percentage of refunds issued within 30 days. So we want to maintain that. We're looking to complete the implementation of Vermont's Property Information Exchange. That's a big project, and this fiscal year into next is the final implementation period. We're looking to move forward with a new scanning project. Both the Vermont Property Information Exchange and the new scanning project are funded by the Computer Modernization Fund, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We want to build on our recruitment success. We've had tremendous success in this space, just like pretty much every department in state government and other departments of tax and revenue around the country. We experienced quite a bit of turnover over the course of the past 2 years. And we put together a team, a cross-departmental team, to focus on recruitment initiatives. And we created deliverables like a recruitment video. I'm not certain if you all have seen that, would be happy to share it. We created standard language. We put our core values front and center. We updated our careers webpage. We came up with an outreach plan, and it's paid off. We have about a 5% vacancy rate, which my understanding is that's significantly lower than most other departments right now in state government. And I was on a call yesterday with COOs, deputies, and commissioners around the country, and it sounds like if you're at a 10 to 12% vacancy rate as a Department of Revenue or tax, you're feeling good about yourself right now. So we're feeling extra good about ourselves. We want to continue process improvements on forms and VTAX updates. We have a lot of continuous improvement projects going on right now in that space, and we're consistently carving out time for our folks to be able to work on those important initiatives. And then further operationalizing organizational values, better incorporating those into our performance evaluation cycle, our merit policy, as well as making sure that our investments as an organization, our expenditures as an organization are going to support those core values. Any questions on that before I get into the nuts and bolts of the budget? All right, so page 7 here is our ups and downs. And the general fund is the column on the left. And the bulk of that is salaries, benefits, and retirement. And also we have a slight uptick in internal service fees. In terms of special fund dollars, we're looking at an increase in internal service fees, but we're also looking at the Computer Modernization Fund, which I'll delve into more on the next slide, as well as the new state appraisal and litigation assistance program, which we're calling the commercial appraisal and litigation assistance program internally. And I'll get into that a bit more on the next slide too, with our 3 major initiatives for this year. And to be clear, this is our operating budget, our annual operating budget here. There is a one-time expense on the next slide that doesn't show up here. Also, there's a slight increase for the shared software that we have with the Joint Fiscal Office for micro simulation modeling for personal income taxes. That's where we model various policy scenarios and can take actual taxpayer data and run that data through these policy changes to identify the impacts on taxpayers. Chambridge, if you all have heard of that. And then decreases, we have a bit of a decrease in our ADS service level agreement. We've been in between shifting servers, and when you have these transitions, you typically have elevated expenses. And so we have some servers off of our books. Building fees for our Williston office. It was space that we weren't using, and with the remote world that we live in, we're much more nimble in terms of working in different places. So we got that off of our books to meet the guidelines set by the administration, and also just use taxpayer dollars and spaces better. Our vacancy savings, we're seeing more turnover, both in terms of retirements, and also we're seeing younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, who don't necessarily want to stay in the same job or in the same organization for a 30-year period, like we saw a bit more with prior generations. And so our vacancy savings rates have been up the past several years. We're not anticipating them being up that much, but we do have a $50,000 increase in vacancy savings. And then we also have some other minor decreases in other operating expenditures. So our three key budget initiatives this year are on slide 8. And the big one is codification of the Tax Computer System Modernization Fund and adjusting that to an annual budget cycle and adjusting the funding mechanism for that. The Computer Modernization Fund has been in existence since 2007. And since it was created, it's received multi-year appropriations, and it's been fundamental to the tax department's digitization and modernization over the past 15 years. And those multi-year appropriations were extraordinarily helpful when we were implementing a huge integrated tax project. You're probably familiar with this, but we took all of these legacy systems, depending on how you look at it, like 5 to 7 legacy systems, and we integrated them into one system, which we call VTax. The vendor, Fast Enterprises, it's a system that they call GenTax. It's tailored to different states. Roughly 30 states have this system. Finland, New Zealand have this system. New York City, DC, Philadelphia have this system. And it has worked really, really well for us. It was a great implementation. Our Commissioner Craig was the VTax director during the rollout of that project. And having that multi-year appropriation was really, really helpful for adjusting in the middle of a project, a multi-year project of that size, as well as some of the other multi-year projects we've had. We're at a point, though, where many of these projects are coming into an operational phase. And from a transparency perspective, we think there's value to making it part of the annual appropriation cycle and also codifying it. Right now, it lives in several different bills from multiple years. So it's in session law. So if you want to look at what it can be used for, how it's funded, where the appropriation is, these are all in different bills that you have to piece together. And something that we have put a lot of thought into is people like Craig and people like myself have been around the department for a while, but it's conceivable that 5-10 years from now, you'll have different people in these roles. And you'll also have different people in your roles, right? We had Representative Ansel, who was chair for a very long time, and somebody like Steve Klein, who was instrumental in the creation of the Computer Modernization Fund at the Joint Fiscal Office, who are no longer around. And I mean, they're around, but they're no longer in these roles. And if you don't know the bills to look for this information, it's difficult to piece it together. So we want it in a place where you can just reference it in one area. Question?
Representative Brendan?
Yeah, I remember when this all started in 2007, and certainly Steve Klein and Janet Ansel were intensely involved in it and supported it the whole way through. At times it wasn't easy to get everybody else to have buy-in. But you finished by sort of answering my question. My question is, can you pull those pieces together into a document, a hard paper document for us that we can have in here to refer to, or will it be done somewhere in this bill?
Your question is, so we do, in the governor's proposed budget, there is language for codifying this as well as for how to fund it. And then because it won't receive, it's just receiving an annual appropriation, it would become part of the budget cycle that way. Yeah. And the Commissioner of Finance and Management and Secretary of Administration were supportive of that. So that doesn't need to change necessarily because it will receive a 1-year appropriation. But is there something else that you'd like to see on that?
Yeah, because some seats around this table change almost every year.
Yeah.
And so if we had something we could hand those people and say, this is what our tax department is supposed to do, and this money is going to someplace worthy.
Yes.
You know, that's really increasing our corporate tax returns and reducing our mistakes in personal returns. If there's some place they can look at that, I think they would have an easier time with the cost because it's significant.
Yeah, so what I should say is these are expenditures that are occurring right now.
Yeah.
These aren't new expenditures. They're new as part of our operating budget because they've been appropriated on these multi-year cycles. So we can definitely put together and have shared with the Joint Fiscal Office an overview of revenues into this fund as well as expenditures from this fund over the past, I think it was since 2015, 2016. Is that something that you're looking for, or are you looking more for what is it used for now? What are we proposing? We are proposing some slight tweaks in language because the existing language references some older projects, like an old warehouse project, for example.
Don't need that.
Yeah.
It's all done.
So the language I can share the language that's in the governor's budget bill because that spells out the codification of this would clearly spell out what it can be used for.
I don't want to dump a whole bunch of new work on you. I know you're busy.
Yeah.
Whatever you can get us that's easy to find from your chair.
Yeah.
Then I think that would be helpful. And Madam Chair, I really don't mean to dump a whole lot of work on him, but I think it would be helpful for all of us. Well, me too, because I haven't been in this room since 2016.
And I think as we're sort of diving into provider feedback, we can pull up the language from whatever the bill number is.
Yeah,
and I think also need to have a conversation as a committee about the general fund versus the education fund and how we're ensuring that we're structuring this in the best possible way going forward. Because I really very much appreciate the department's efforts at transparency on this budgeting, because it's really helpful to be seeing that and making sort of IT there's more transparent throughout government, as well as guaranteeing that there's money available for IT money.
Yeah.
I
think it'll be helpful for future legislators and administrators. I'm looking for the reference. I thought I had a note on this. I'm looking for the reference in the governor's budget bill, but I can send that along. I can send that section because that spells out exactly what we're proposing.
But you could send it to the whole committee.
Yep.
Everybody.
Yeah, I'll send it to Sorsha if that works. I'll send that along to everyone. So the other component of this too is we are proposing to adjust the funding mechanism. Initially, the way that the funding mechanism worked for a number of years for paying for the VTAX project was we baselined our compliance related revenue. So we could quantify what revenue was related to compliance exercises in that where we had to take an action. We had to bill, we had to conduct an audit, right? We had to reach out with our collectors. And in the vast majority of revenues that the state receives are voluntarily paid. That's voluntary compliance is really the bedrock of the US and the Vermont tax system. And that's where we've shifted a tremendous amount of our compliance resources is into education, because the vast majority of inaccuracies on returns are due to misunderstandings. They're not due to intentional fraud schemes, though those do come up, and we do work with neighboring states and we have teams to identify that type of activity. The vast majority are just common mistakes. And so, or a lack of knowledge that you needed to file in a certain way or do X, Y, and Z. And so what we're proposing is instead of basing it on those compliance-based revenues, we're proposing to decrease the percentage the overall percentage that applies to the base amount of revenues, but apply it across all revenues that the department collects. And I believe what the chair was just referencing is maybe proposing to refine that a little bit so it doesn't go across all revenues. But our initial proposal is to use a lower percentage across all revenues, because in the past there have been concerns that there is an incentive for us to take aggressive compliance actions with the existing funding structure. And because that isn't where we're putting our emphasis now, we put a heavy emphasis on education and improving voluntary compliance. We think that structure is better representative of the work of the department and removes the disincentive that legislators have raised concern about in the past.
Thank you. If I could go back to your first ask, codification of the tax computer system modernization fund. Are you far enough along in the process that you have some predictability ahead of time, because obviously in the early stages, I assume the amount of money varies considerably depending on what state, if you will, of the modernization you're in. And I guess I'm trying to undergird the attractiveness of this by saying, is it gotten more predictable as to what the needs are going to be? That's my question.
It is more predictable, but I will say, for example, a project like our scanning project, we just went out to bid on again because it was clear that we needed to clarify some elements of that request for proposal. And so that's an example of, depending on how those proposals come in, and that's a new project, it's not as expensive as the Gentax project, where it is conceivable that we might come back during the BAA and say we need to tweak this appropriation a little bit. What's helpful, though, is this fund has some money in it. So it's not as though the legislature would need to find more money for it. However, that being said, if the funding mechanism is not adjusted, the fund will likely run out of revenue in the middle of next fiscal year or toward the end of next fiscal year, because the funding mechanism was adjusted when we were coming out of the Gentax project or the VTax project. We were generating revenues for that fund that were in line with implementing that massive project. And so revenues were up here, but when we went to operationalize, instead of spending, $15 million a year, we were spending more like $5 million a year. So the idea was to spend down that surplus over time, and we've reached that point. Mm-hmm. So that is a key element of this funding proposal.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it is more predictable, but I do realize it's going to add burden. Frankly, for me in this position, I might have to come back during the BAA and say we need to adjust this a little bit. I should also say that the $5.2 million appropriation right now doesn't account for things like a payroll tax. It doesn't account for new policy initiatives that might bring additional expense. And so depending on what this body decides, this committee, as well as the legislature at large, whatever goes into law, that could adjust that appropriation. Whereas in the past, would have that appropriation for several years, and we could say, yeah, we can make that, 1 million or 2 million or whatever the cost ends up being for a proposal. We can make that work. Like the cannabis excise tax is a good example of that. It was a $1.5 million implementation, and we said, we have spending authority for this. We can make this work. Any other questions on that? So the next proposal I want to highlight is the State Appraisal and Litigation Assistance Program, or the Commercial Appraisal and Litigation Assistance Program. And I understand this committee is dealing with the larger issues surrounding reappraisal in the state right now. But this proposal is based on what passed last year, and it's an $800,000 proposal. $300,000 would go to two positions, that's salaries and benefits for a program manager, as well as a staff attorney that would help with litigation as well as appeals. And that's technically through the AGO's office, but we pay for that. And then $500,000 for commercial appraisal services that would be set up with contracts. I believe you all have received information on this, but if you have any more questions, happy to go over that. But this is a big one on the equity side too, in terms of, our property tax system is a closed loop system. And if some taxpayers aren't being accurately and adequately and reliably appraised, that can shift tax burden onto other taxpayers.
I think we've talked about that quite extensively, but.
Yeah, you're right that we've gone round and round, or should we say, spent considerable time.
Thank you for that correction, Representative.
Ever upward, Madam Chair.
Yes, indeed.
On consideration of appraisal programs. What exactly is covered under the new state appraisal litigation assistance program? Because I'm not sure that I know what you're doing versus what all the things that are proposed out there.
So this would just be for commercial and industrial properties.
Perfect sense. I got it.
And it would be paid.
The thing we approved last year.
Yeah. Got that.
It would be, the proposal would pay for it out of local option tax processing fees.
That's it.
Which there's a special fund that when you were asking about, I believe it was you, Representative, when you were asking about fees and spending those fees, We spend those fees on the local option tax processing fees on the administration of local option taxes. And as more municipalities have come online with that program over time, the amount of revenue for our administrative fees exceeds our administrative expenses here. So the proposal is to use that amount, that delta, to pay for this program. And then we are proposing to modernize the current use program with a one-time appropriation from the current use special fund, which currently has a surplus of about $2 million in it. I don't anticipate that fund is going to continue to have a surplus in the future. We identified why it generated a surplus over a roughly 10-year period. And when we identified that, we were also looking at, frankly, one of our worst performing programs at the department. And I want to be very clear that we have very talented and dedicated staff who work to administer this program. But this program, so roughly 43% of Vermont's land is enrolled in current use. And this program is a primarily paper-based program that relies on a lot of manual processes. Even when we receive applications right now digitally, there's a lot of cross-referencing in two other systems, our VTAX system and our VTPI system. And so what we're proposing to do is to digitize a bunch of those records. So this is a program where once a property is enrolled, you need to maintain all of those records over time. So all of those records are paper right now, and they're in a vault. And it's going to cost money to digitize those, but it's going to be money well spent in the long run for the state. And what we want to do is shift the application process, which would then put those the primary administration of that program into our VTAX system so that a range of processes can be automated. Various eligibility checks, for example, can be automated very quickly. So we view this as a great opportunity to capacity plan to kind of right size the workload for that team. And we can go over the metrics of that program, but it is one of our worst performing programs, and it's due to the manual intensive processes and the paper-based nature of it. Anybody have any questions on that?
So,
yeah.
Is the 2 million, that's figure?
1.75 million.
Yeah.
Among your core values are accessibility and transparency. And so, as I'm sure you can imagine, one of the reasons it's so expensive is because a lot of folks who are participating are not necessarily computer people.
Mm-hmm.
So I would hope that there's a trade-off, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to eliminate the paper and going online will favor some folks, but not others. So
that's a fair point.
And so I guess urge sensitivity to the fact that may remain a highly labor-intensive effort.
So the end goal here is, so this I've kind of zoomed out with our current use team and our VTAX and our ADS teams on this, because I realized we had 3 processes that were going at the same time, and we needed to align those processes. So one of those processes is the scanning project, where we're going to have a new front-end scanning system on a new scanner. And we're also going to update our VTAX system to have a document repository in that system so that our folks aren't going into a separate system for that. Most Gen tax states have this. The state of Vermont decided not to implement this at the front end. So that's one. Then 2 is digitizing all of those paper records, where you're going to have to scan those in. And if we have it set up with a document repository in VTAX, then they'll be able to go right into there. And then the third is this project, where you're going to set up the structure for current use in the VTAX system. And so even with paper returns, so long as these projects proceed as planned, what you'll end up having 2-3 years from now is you'll have a current use paper application come in. It'll go through our centralized scanning process at the department. It'll scan right into the department's VTAX system, and that information will be in our system for our folks who administer the program to work with it. That's how all of our other tax types work right now.
How many file cabinets and how much office space do we free up here?
For current use, it's a vault room. So it's not, it's
amazing.
I joke about, we need to get some big tarps to cover those filing cabinets, but it's quite voluminous.
So just echoing the chair's comments earlier, I really appreciate the investments in IT, which, help us all do our work better and more efficiently and more accessibly. So it's big and expensive to do this work, but I think it's vital for the future of our government services. So
Thanks for your support.
Back to you.
No problem. Any questions on this before I move forward? So we typically, as part of this process too, provide an overview of key performance measures. So personal income tax administration, when I was talking about the most efficient tax season that we've had, our erroneous refunds prevented were up last year, which that's great. Some of that is fraud. Some of that is just taxpayers making mistakes, but nonetheless, we want to collect the right amount of tax. We want to administer the correct amount of benefits in accordance with the law. So went up from 6.9 million to 8.1 million. Timely filed refunds issued within 45 days of the due date went from 90% to 95%. And that was the loftiest goal that department leadership had ever set for our folks, and they met it. We're very pleased with that. We made a number of adjustments to meet these goals, but it was ultimately folks on the ground who did the work to get it done. And in terms of those adjustments, we did things like at the beginning of the filing season, we took a more strategic approach in terms of planning how we were going to use resources. So we shifted resources from our compliance division and shifted resources from other sections in our taxpayer services division. And we plan to do that at the front end of the filing season so that folks were working specific queues from the very beginning, gave them more predictability in the process. And rather than taking a reactionary, okay, we need you all to shift over to help with this now, it allowed people to get out in front on things.
Fine. I'm realizing that we have 10 minutes left with you.
Want to go to questions?
You have a lot of slides and
we don't have to go through all.
I want to give you a minute to just prioritize what you want to share with us. We can absolutely have you back. But wanted to make sure that you have a chance to tie something up with a bow.
Sure. Yeah, I typically go over the performance measurements here and then ask if folks have questions.
Oh, look at that. You were timing it perfectly.
So
I interrupted a moment too soon.
No problem. No, I appreciate it. And then refunds issued within 30 days of filing was up. So if we go to the next slide, you have the property tax credit. Property tax adjustments granted were down slightly, and I think you all have received some testimony on that. Erroneous credits prevented were up slightly, and claims that require manual review were roughly at 16%. And that's a reflection of capacity planning. How much capacity do we have? We don't have the capacity to review every single return. And so what are things that we can do to reduce the amount of returns that we're reviewing while still ensuring that we're catching erroneous information? Then we also have the renter credit, first year of the renter credit. The amount of renter credits granted was roughly the same as calendar year 2021. And I think you've heard from Craig and or Rebecca on this. We are going to see how this year goes. There were a lot of federal dollars that that were pretty certain influenced eligibility last year. Mm-hmm. And so initially, the goal was to administer $9.5 million in renter credits. That's what was budgeted. It was meant to be revenue neutral. It didn't happen, but it was also an extraordinary year in terms of federal assistance. So we're waiting to see what happens there. In terms of erroneous credits prevented, that was down a bit. And then in terms of credits issued within 60 days of filing, it was down a little bit from the renter rebate. We did have some issues on the vendor side, some of the large software vendors that folks use for filing their personal income tax returns. There was a little bit of confusion in that space, so we had to work with them to correct that. And that did delay the period that we could issue these credits within. But for a first year, we were pretty pleased with the performance. So hoping to make gains in that space this year. And then current use is the last slide. And the amount of benefits to landowners, the amount of savings to landowners, depending on how you want to view it, was roughly the same in calendar year 2022 as calendar year 21. Applications processed by April 15th was about the same. We don't view that number as particularly successful. And then the average days to process an application, roughly 150 days. Again, this is, I want to be clear, we're not putting, this team is doing a lot of great work in this space, but this is indicative of a need to shift to a more digital-based process. There's a lot of things that can be done to streamline that work. And when we shift this into the VTAX system, it's also a great opportunity for us to examine how we're doing our work and really overhaul that as well. So this is our poorest performing program.
And so are you saying that you're doing a lot of sort of process improvements as you're codifying things within your IT programming?
Yeah, so to shift this whole program into a new system, it would be a lost opportunity if we didn't examine how we're going about doing our work in that section.
But I appreciate that you're taking the opportunity to.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, Andrew, what was the figure on the codifying computer modernization fund?
So this year, we're looking at a $5.2 million appropriation, and that maintains our existing VTAX service levels. That pays off the VT Pi project. We're in the final phase of implementation, and we have some more implementation payments heading into next fiscal year. That pays for the beginning of the scanning project. And that pays for the micro simulation model that the Joint Fiscal Office and the Tax Department use.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Spending time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone, we're going to break for lunch. We are back here at 1 o'clock to dive back into H67, and then we're going to pick up H76 captive